Welcome into the Hard Count, the People's College Football Show, baby. No ball for a little bit now until spring games, with the Super Bowl wrapping up this past Sunday. Doesn't mean we don't still have a ton to jump into. It's Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. Going to talk some Oklahoma offense we can expect there. We'll talk about USC and my expectations for that program as a whole in Los Angeles from a big picture perspective. Spoiler alert, I think they should be a contender every single year. But let's start with the Big Ten Conference, because we said previously that's the best conference in college football. If you haven't noticed, a couple of odds out there for the conference winners, if you will. I want to unpack the Big Ten right now because I think it's a really interesting spot to be in. Ohio State won the national title this past season, Michigan the year before that. How does it stack up here going forward? Let's unpack it together. Ohio State has the best odds to win the conference. From a big picture standpoint, that makes sense. But when you take a closer look, you're like, hang on a second, man. We drinking too much of that scarlet and gray Kool-Aid? Are we riding what was last year's national title maybe just a little bit too much when you look at these odds? Plus 170, that's fine. But to me, we sat here on this show the morning, really a few hours after that game finished up in Atlanta. And I told you, hey, I think Ohio State, not just the favorite to win the Big Ten next year, they're my favorite when it comes to being in the college football playoff yet again, being the second team in our way too early top 10. A lot's changed since we made that statement. A new coordinator, going to be a new defensive coordinator, going to be a new quarterback. We don't even know who the quarterback's going to be. Brian Hartline is going to be the new offensive coordinator in Columbus. But you see where I'm going with this? I think Ohio State's going to be really good. I still think they're going to be a playoff team as we sit here right now in February. But the best odds to win the conference when we don't know all that much to expect from the staff, I get it. If you have confidence in Ryan Day, phenomenal. You have confidence in Julian Sand, I'm right there with you. But the best odds to win the conference, by the margin that they're at right now, according to what Vegas is saying, I feel good about them, but I don't think personally, knowing what we know about them, or what we don't know about them right now, they would be my favorite. Not saying we don't pick them, but based on odds, my favorite to win the conference. A little bit rich for me, but I get it. You've earned it when you got some trophies, so we'll move right along. In a similar vein, Oregon, they're at the second best odds at plus 230. This feels fair and more fair than what we said about Ohio State. And people are going to jump on us and say, JD, new quarterback for Ohio State, new quarterback for Oregon. Why do you have an issue with Ohio State being the odds favorite and you think Oregon's about right when it comes to where they're positioned? My pushback there is it's not so much a Dante Moore opinion, even though I think the dude's going to be a stud. He's also a five-star cat coming out of coming out of the high school level and having played some at UCLA maybe gives you some confidence. To me, this is a Will Stein opinion when you talk about Oregon, a Dan Lanning opinion. All Will Stein has done since getting the keys to the Oregon offense as the OC out there has been produce Heisman Trophy finalist caliber quarterbacks. Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel. Now, both those cats through the portal. Dante Moore also through the portal, a little bit less proven coming over to Oregon. But I just feel like we know what we're getting from Oregon. So plus 230 feels about right. Will they repeat in the toughest conference in college football in terms of conference champions? We'll see, but 230 to me is about where they belong when it comes to those odds. For those of y'all that aren't big into gambling at home, that's totally fine. Plus 230 essentially just means if you put $100 down and Oregon wins the Big Ten, you would make $230 off of that bet. Penn State is third. Now, Penn State being the third best odds to win this conference is really fascinating. To me, they should be the favorite. And that's not a knock on Oregon. That's not a knock on Ohio State. But I think if Penn State had a different logo next to their name and you didn't know who their head coach was, just based on their roster, based on their coordinators, based on bringing their quarterback back and their running backs back and all the key pieces they're bringing back, like Penn State, I feel like we know the most about them as it stands right now. And a lot of people, I think, will be very quick to say, well, yeah, but JD, James Franklin, like, come on, guy's not winning big games. Just Big Game James has kind of become like a slight of sorts. I mean, that sucks, dude, to have Big Game James be your nickname, but have it be sarcastic. Like, that's tough. We feel for you, James Franklin. What I would say is narratives, we've said this for a while, kind of a tricky thing right now in college football. People were saying the same thing about Kirby Smart at one point in time. He couldn't win the big game, and then his sixth season, he wins the national title. Same thing about Ryan Day. Just won a national championship in his sixth year. I get James Franklin has been around the block longer than both those individuals. But if you're going to be married to a narrative in a world where losses mean less than they ever have before in the world of college football, Be my guest, but that would be a slippery slope. That'd be a tricky logic to really have your opinion stand on. So Penn State, third best odds, I'm cool with it. But if I were to sprinkle some value on a certain team, Penn State I think would be the team that I would put down to be the favorite in this conference. Michigan with the fourth best odds. Now they're at plus 800, so we start to see this number next to these teams when it's in relation to their chances to win the Big Ten next year start to fluctuate a little bit more as we get down this list. But this is purely to me a question of who do you believe Bryce Underwood is going to be in 2025? Because I've said before, he should be, and I believe will be your quarterback by game one. I think he will be phenomenal. I think he is a special talent. But if you think he's going to have some growing pains and you think maybe he has a very freshman-esque kind of season where, yeah, he's really talented, but he also looks like a true freshman at times, I wouldn't push back super hard against that, but you're probably looking at winning 7 or 8 games. But if he hits the ground running like I expect he will, and I think he's going to be phenomenal from the jump for Michigan, you're probably looking at right around 9 or 10 wins. And if you win 10 football games, depending on who those losses are to and what the rest of your conference is looking like, I wouldn't put it past Michigan at all to find themselves in that conference title weekend, hanging out in Indianapolis during that weekend playing for a conference title. That wouldn't shock me at all. Now, again, it's all about Bryce Underwood, but I think that's very much so on the table. So plus 800, very volatile. Bryce Underwood could have a tough acclimation period, and Michigan is fighting for being bowl eligible again. Or, again, I just told you he pops and they find themselves playing on conference title weekend. Now, Indiana, they're also in the mix here. When we talk about conference odds, I believe there's something like plus 2,500. I don't want to spend too much time on them. A lot of people are going to pitch you the Curt Cignetti idea and say all it is win, and you're not wrong. But like the schedule last year for Indiana is what made them who they were. That sounds kind of disrespectful, and I apologize to the good folks in Bloomington, Indiana that are hearing me say that. But like legitimately, you didn't have to play Oregon. You didn't have to play Penn State. However, this year you do have to play Oregon. You do have to play Ohio State. You do have to play Illinois. Like there's a lot more to work with here for Curt Cignetti and company, and also you don't have Curtis Rourke coming back. You got a new quarterback who's good, but I have a hard time believing they have the success they had last year into 2025. So the two schools that I think are worth noting when you talk about just extreme value, if you're talking about teams that kind of pop into what 2025 is, Nebraska to me could be what Indiana was last year. And there's a lot of things that line up to make you feel excited about the Huskers in 2025. It's Matt Rule's third year. And Matt Rule's last 2 stops, if we're using that as our trend, he's played for the conference title each of his last 2 stops at the college level. Temple, his third year, they went from winning like 1 or 2 games to playing for the conference title his third year. Same deal at Baylor. When I think it was 1 game his first year there. Then they go play for the Big 12 in that third season. So if you're trusting that trend, makes a lot of sense. Plus the schedule. No Ohio State, no Oregon. You get Michigan at home. You do have to go to Penn State. But if you only have 1 loss in conference play, you should feel pretty good about your chances, based on tiebreakers at least, to play for that thing in Indy. And then USC is at that same number at plus 4,500, so you can make a good amount of money if you think USC is going to win the conference. To me, this is really a pretty simple equation because I trust the defense now in Los Angeles. How wild is that to say? I trust what Dan Lynn's doing. I trust Eric Henderson. I trust that staff, and I trust that they are going to have that defense continuing to evolve and building on what they did a season ago. I just think they have a different mentality. And that's saying something, because you would have probably walked barefoot over broken glass from Los Angeles to Orange County if I told you that could be a reality, where you trust the defense based on what happened the last couple of years. The question is, can Lincoln Riley turn the offense back into what you expect them to be of a Lincoln Riley coached offense? That's the question we're asking about USC, y'all. That would excite me. I mean, last year we talk about how much they didn't achieve, and you look at all the ways they fell short during the regular season. It's definitely true they fell short, but you can't tell me that they weren't in all those games. I mean, the Notre Dame game is the one game you point to as the game in the fourth quarter that got away from them. Outside of that, I believe USC held a lead in like something crazy like every single fourth quarter game that they played. So speaking of USC in general, I just think there's a lot there to get excited about. And I think if Jade Maiava turns into a Lincoln Riley caliber of quarterback, a Lincoln Riley brand quarterback, USC is going to be a player in the Big Ten. And they really could have been a year ago. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, but they could have been a year ago. And I think USC is definitely sleeping giant's such an overused phrase, but they're that great white shark that I think could breach in the Big Ten and make some noise when it's all said and done, turning the tape on 2025. Appreciate everybody tuned in, man. If you're on podcast, this next thing I'm going to describe to you doesn't really apply to you at all. But if you're watching on YouTube, you've noticed now some of these thumbnails starting to look a little bit different. Different way you're receiving this full-length show. We've done some premieres. We've done some lives. We're just kind of publishing this as a video in itself. So we're testing some things out, all right? That's what the offseason is for some self-scouting and improving and all those things, looking in the mirror and taking a good look at how you can improve. So we're doing that right now. We're going to settle into a rhythm here sooner rather than later. But bottom line, here's what I can promise you. You will keep getting full-length shows. You will continue to get year-round college football content, and the format of this show in terms of us talking to y'all from this mic into that camera, Cato on the ones and twos, that is not changing, all right? So, yes, mechanics are going to try to shift around a little bit, but ultimately the heart behind this show and the passion behind this show, that is staying 100% the same. So, appreciate you being subscribed and by being locked in for all of the pivots and adjustments we're making on this end. Now, speaking of adjustments, I think USC has got to make some adjustments. I think they are making some adjustments internally right now in Southern California. And I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about with y'all on this Tuesday show, and I just keep having the same sentiment come back to the forefront of my mind, which is that USC has no excuse, in my opinion, as to why they shouldn't compete for national championships every single year. Now, I did not say that USC should win the national title every single year. But looking at what that brand is, looking at who their head coach is, looking at the way they've adjusted over the course of the last even year and a half, I have a ton of belief in USC, and I have a ton of belief in where they're headed, and I think legitimately how they're structured, they should compete for national titles every single year. Now, I want to also be clear about this. I have some bias baked into this opinion. Those of y'all that actually watch the show and that know my background, from Southern California, which is what made it so hilarious during the season when we talk about SEC teams and people in the comment section talking about SEC bias. Like, I grew up like an hour or so away from the LA Coliseum. Like, some of my earliest memories are going to USC football games. That was my first introduction into what the sport is. My first ever college football game I went to was USC UCLA, and that was like, oh, that's rivalry football. That's pretty freaking cool. So I have some bias here. I have outrageously high standards for USC. But when I look at the way that the college football landscape is shifting and the way that USC is maybe fallen short over the course of the last couple of years on the recruiting trail, USC should be the school on the West Coast, and being the school on the West Coast should be enough to put you in that national title discussion every single year. Think about it this way. There's a handful of states across the U.S. where if you dominate recruiting in that state, you should be able to compete for national titles. That's Texas, that's Florida, that's Georgia, that's California. Look at what Georgia's done in that state. Pretty much dominated, right? When Georgia owns the state of Georgia in recruiting, they compete for national titles. Kirby Smart has 2 to his name in the last 4 years to make good on that assessment we have on this show. Okay, so put that there. Texas and Texas A&M going back and forth in that state a little bit more recently, but Texas done a great job recruiting the Lone Star State. The last 2 years, what have they done? Been in the semifinals of the college football playoff. Both the 4-team and the 12-team model, they have been in the mix. Now, I'm not telling you national recruiting doesn't still play a factor here for both those schools, but like, you own the state, you're in good position to go make some real noise. Talk about Florida. No school has really been able to just own the state of Florida internally, in addition to, the schools in the state, the quantity of like a Miami, a Florida State, a UCF now being a Power 4 operation with some good resources. You also have a good amount of other schools in the SEC and the ACC for that matter, trying to get top talent, and the Big Ten trying to, poach your guys. So there's a lot of competition in the state of Florida. California, Alabama won the state of California when it comes to recruiting this past cycle. If you're USC, I get that you haven't had the product on the field to keep those guys home, but like, that shouldn't happen. And if I'm USC, there's much less competition within the state to keep top guys home. No knock on a Cal or a UCLA or a Stanford, but like, that's the fact of the matter. So USC, why haven't they been able to own the state? A lot of it, I think, is due to what they haven't done on the field in the last couple of seasons. I mean, kids want to go where they're going to win, where they're going to develop and go play in the NFL. So USC has been just quite frankly lacking that outside of the quarterback position. I know Lincoln Riley and his quarterback background speaks for itself, but overall, like, it's tough to sign up to go play for a team that's going to go 7-5 when you got schools like Alabama beating down your door. So there's that. But the other part of this is Oregon, with what they do in recruiting, they've also had their fair share of success in the state of California. So to some degree, you say, okay, yeah, we're going to have these schools across the country from an Oregon to a Bama to a Texas to a Georgia. Like, everyone's going to be after 5-star prospects. That much is clear. But if I'm USC and I can just own the majority of that recruiting, if I can just own Southern California, forget the entire state. If I can just own Southern California, there is fertile enough recruiting ground there to where you should be in position to compete for national championships. And USC hasn't done that. And that shouldn't be okay with USC. I don't think it is okay with USC. I think Lincoln Riley, by nature of how they've attacked the talent acquisition arm of their current structure, going and landing a Chad Bowden from Notre Dame, it shows me they're serious about that. And so when you take all of that and you pair it with what USC has been historically, the frustration for me as someone who grew up in the shadow of what USC is like, the blueprint is right in front of you to be successful at USC. Like, look at what Pete Carroll did. And I get it's a different time. I get it's the BCS era, which we'll talk about later in the show, actually. And I get that there was, some discussion around how USC operated with how they landed A1 Reggie Bush. But, like, that's the blueprint, man. You keep the top dudes in the state home. You go make key acquisitions nationally. And you go win a whole lot of football games. Because USC is built, I think, for the modern era. Like, what Pete Carroll did was, in a lot of ways, I think, a glimpse into the future of how USC needs to recruit, needs to win right now. And people will be very quick to just go back to what I said a second ago. Yeah, but JD, like, they were paying players, right? Like, Reggie Bush, everyone knows about that with the Heisman, and, like, that's a whole other discussion. I think that's nonsense in general. But if you want to die on that hill of, well, they were paying players, look at where we are in college football, y'all. It's about paying players. If that's really the take we're looking at here, USC should be better than anybody in that department. It's Los Angeles. You don't think there's some resources in that city to go land top talent? You don't think kids want to go live in 70 degrees year-round? There's a lot to like about USC. And it's not like you're recruiting them to a place where football has never been prominent. Like, USC's got a ton of Heisman trophies and national title trophies down there in Heritage Hall. I guess up there in Heritage Hall in relation to where we are right now in Nashville. USC should own the era we're in right now in modern college football because of everything that I just mentioned. Now, the other part of this, though, the reason, and we've alluded to this a few times throughout this segment, but let's hammer this home. The product at USC needs to speak for itself. We can talk about NIL, we can talk about history, but if you're not winning football games and these kids don't believe they have a chance to go compete for national titles and right along with that go get drafted to the NFL, then it's all for naught. Outside of the quarterback position, then it's all for naught. And so in some ways now, people are going to be asking, well, JD, you say that about USC, and you say that about what Pete Carroll was and about the structure and all those things. Why are the lights not on yet? Why is USC not competing at the highest level? Question to follow up with that, do you have the right guy in Lincoln Riley? And my answer to that is Lincoln Riley of 2 years ago was not yet the right guy, even though they had success on the field and they had success in the Pac-12. But I think Lincoln Riley, by nature of how he has slowly but surely adapted, I think he's becoming the right guy. Whether it was his call or not, Alex Grinch no longer the DC out there. So what do? I know Lincoln Riley is at least responsible for the hires there. He's responsible for bringing a Danton Lynn and helping that defense be what they were a year ago, improved by a full touchdown. Okay, so they're adapting on defense. I mentioned the way that they are playing ball more now on the talent acquisition side, going to land in Chad Bowden from a team that played for a national title last year, your rival in Notre Dame. More years than not, you're going to have a dude at quarterback as long as Lincoln Riley is your head coach. So if you can tell me the other things are going to round into form, defense, other recruiting, things that go along with that, okay, I feel good about USC here in the future. So the obstacle and the advantage for USC, I think, is kind of both linked to what the Big Ten is. Like, the obstacle in the Big Ten is, well, now you have to probably play a tougher conference schedule than you would have in the Pac-12. Pac-12, rest in peace, we miss you. But Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State is going to give you probably more often than not more trouble than an Arizona State and an Arizona and an Oregon State. No shade to those schools, but that's just the reality. So that's the obstacle. But the advantage is you're playing in what is now, I would say, the best conference in college football. And kids want to go play against the best. Kids want to go play in a conference where they're playing other potential NFL prospects that you turn on the tape and say, okay, you played against this first-round pick and you did X, Y, and Z against him. Great, we want to put you higher on our draft board. That's how this whole thing works. So for USC, it's all about pushing this snowball up the hill. And when it gets rolling, I think USC has a better chance than some other schools to get it rolling pretty quickly when it gets going downhill. Because of LA, because of Lincoln Riley, because of the quarterback play they're going to have, there's a lot to like about USC. So for me, they should compete in the national title picture every single year, and there's no excuse for them not to. And I think Lincoln Riley knows that. I think he understands that's what the brand demands. Just because it hasn't happened now, the last couple of seasons, doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future. And USC getting their act together, I think, is going to pay some dividends here very, very soon with how they're operating on the recruiting trail. 2026, the Trojans off to a hot start from what we can gather. Very curious to keep a pulse on that. Again, if you haven't yet tuned in to this show and subscribed, love to have you all a part of this. College football year round. We have a good time on this show, man. I'll say that much. People's college football show, college football the way that you want it unpacked. None of the hot takes or the other stuff that has nothing to do with football, trying to be baked into football. We have a good time and talk things outside of football, but bottom line, make sure you're subscribed, and we appreciate you in advance for doing so. So spring ball's around the corner, and we cannot wait for it. We've said many times on this show, we react to spring football games the same way we would a normal football game being played on a Saturday. Like we break it down, give you our takes, and have thoughts on it after the fact. Alabama's spring game, and Alabama's spring football in general, will be very much so anticipated because of the uncertainty in that quarterback room. And we did a video, I want to say it was last week, giving you some early predictions on how these quarterback battles would shake out across the country. I said on that video, I think Alabama has the most complex, mysterious, interesting battle of any school across the country heading into 2025. So we reserve the right to change our mind as we get more information on this. But we have a take on who we think should be the guy in Tuscaloosa, or who we would bet money on right now to be the guy in Tuscaloosa as we sit here right now in the month of February. But it's probably a 3-horse race. It's not a mystery. It's Ty Simpson, it's Austin Mack, and it's the freshman who's super talented in Keelan Russell. The tricky thing about this is, with all three of these guys, you can make a very strong case for and against them being the starting quarterback. Like the pitch for Ty Simpson isn't tough to get together. Hey, he stayed for a long time. Nick Saban recruited him. Like, he's waited his turn. It's his turn right now, is it not? Well, yes, but the case against him is, well, hey, dude, if he was so good, if he was a viable option for you at quarterback, why is he not getting any burn when Jalen Milroe throws 3 interceptions against Oklahoma? Not even can he, take over the QB1 job from Jalen Milroe, because I think Jalen Milroe and what he was just as an overall leadership presence in that room, and the way that Alabama had themselves, quite frankly, in contention for the college football playoff all the way through November, yeah, he probably deserved to be the guy. But for Ty Simpson to not even be a factor in that offense when Milroe struggled is a little bit off-putting and curious to me when we talk about him. Austin Mack, to me, is very easy to fall in love with the idea of the guy. It's kind of like when you think about moving to Hawaii. The idea is awesome. Go live next to the ocean where it's beautiful weather all year round. Everyone lives outside and works outside, and it's just good island vibes year round. Yeah, it's a great idea in principle, but then you pair it with the idea of well, hey, you're not on the same time zone as virtually anybody else that you keep in contact with if you keep in touch with people in the U.S. It's a multiple hour flight to get anywhere on the mainland. It's not always the same thing in practice as in principle. The idea of an Austin Mack is, well, hey, Kalen DeBoer brought him over from Washington. The dude's got all these physical tools at 6'6", and Ryan Grubb speaks highly of him, and he's got this athleticism. It's easy to like the idea of Austin Mack, but the case against him. If he's so good, why was he 4th on the depth chart last year? Right? There's some question marks to be had there that I think are extremely fair. Now, Keelan Russell is the wildest card out of them all because he's the true freshman. He'll get in there in the spring, and he'll be a guy that I think has a chance to really make some noise in this whole quarterback derby. The case for him is people close to Bama think he's the most talented quarterback of this group, purely from a raw ability perspective. pretty good case to make for the guy. The case against him is, well, he's a freshman. And some people might even turn that into the positive of like, well, hey, if he struggles, you can just fall back on the idea of, well, he's a freshman. Keelan Russell's a freshman, so we can't really knock Alabama for not making the playoff in 2025. Nobody's saying that, first of all. Nobody's saying that. Like, I think small-minded people around, or people that don't get Alabama football might say that, but whether it's Keelan Russell or whether it's Johnny Unitas in his prime, it doesn't matter. The expectations at Bama don't change. If you don't believe me, look at what last year was. Bama misses the playoff. You got people wondering if Kalen DeBoer is the right guy, quietly to themselves. Probably the more extreme part of Bama Twitter, but I think it's still, the point stands in itself. Keelan Russell, if he's your guy, great, but you don't get this, oh, he's a freshman excuse. If you play him to go achieve what this team is capable of achieving, and I think this team is capable of achieving playing in the college football playoff, just full stop. So that's kind of unpacking the room as a whole and the complexities around it. The take I had when we unpacked this battle in our predictions segment, and the take I still have, is I think Austin Mack is your guy. Now, we'll see if that's the case when we get into spring football, and more information means we will change our opinion. But I just go back to the Ty Simpson thing. If he was really that good, if we were sure he could be your guy next year, even if he is the betting favorite, why has he not at least gotten some burn in this whole situation? Do you really want to put, when you talk about Keelan Russell, the entire pressure of Bama optically in year two on his shoulders? And what I mean by that is, if Alabama in 2025 misses the playoff, recruiting will, I think, start to take a little bit of a dip, because people will say, well, Bama isn't really Bama anymore. 2 years since Nick Saban's been gone, they've missed the playoff each of those 2 years. Bama, they may still have some better football ahead of them, but I don't know if we view Bama in the same light. I think that's what hangs in the balance in 2025. I wouldn't want to put that kind of pressure on my freshman quarterback. So the thing that I think encouraged me the most about Austin Mack, and he's extremely unknown at this point in time based on what he is as a quarterback, because we haven't really seen him play at all. The thing that I can't get past is that he's been recruited now by Kalen DeBoer twice. Like, if he got to Washington and wasn't as good as Kalen DeBoer thought he was going to be, he had no reason to then recruit him with him to Alabama. Alabama had a stacked quarterback room when Austin Mack got over there. It wasn't like they were wanting for quarterbacks, but he made the decision to bring him with him from Washington to Tuscaloosa. So he's been recruited by Kalen DeBoer, a guy who majors in the quarterback position, not once, but twice. You pair that with the reality that he is going to be playing in an offense that he was originally committed to play to at Washington under Ryan Grubb. So if you want to look at it this way, maybe Austin Mack even has a slight leg up on the rest of this competition if you're talking purely about what it's like in the quarterback meetings and having answers to Ryan Grubb's questions on the whiteboard or in film or whatever you want to speak to there. The thing I do know is in 2025, you are running Kalen DeBoer's offense. Okay, you're not doing this whole thing where it's, we want to kind of cater to this kid's skill set. Like, you did that last year with Jalen Milroe. It didn't work to the degree that you wanted it to work. You cannot have a take on Kalen DeBoer so strong as he's not the right guy in Tuscaloosa when we haven't even seen him operate the offense that he has coached throughout the entirety of his successful career. It's not an accident that Kalen DeBoer got the job at Alabama. Not an accident the dude's like 104 or whatever he is in 12 as a head coach. He knows how to coach football. And Ryan Grubb now is his OC. He's coached a lot of big-time football with. It's not coincidental. So when we look to the future now, you play the guy, I believe, who allows you to run Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb's offense the most effectively. Very important I say this. Apostrophe S for Grubbs. So it's not Ryan Grubbs, it's Ryan Grubb, apostrophe S, his offense, for those of y'all keeping track at home. So the thing I'm going to keep an eye on during spring football, and we all should too, is I am going to be scouring the Bama online message boards. So go get a membership there if you haven't already. The best coverage in the Alabama market when it comes to covering football and all things Alabama, period. I'm going to be scouring the message boards, and I'm going to be scouring the practice reports, and I'm also going to be very intently listening to what Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb are saying in their post-practice press conferences. And we're going to have to read between the lines a little bit here, but I'm looking for things like, hey, he made great decisions today. Hey, he's really taken on a leadership role for us right now. Things of that nature they're the correct thing to say because you're not differentiating between one quarterback being the guy and another guy not being the guy during spring football, because I think this will probably go into fall camp. But who wins the team first and who doesn't turn the football over, those things I believe will add it to who's your starting quarterback. It doesn't have to be the first practice, but like by the end of spring, we should all sort of have a little bit of a vibe to who's in the lead for this. Kind of reminds me of Georgia when it was Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck going back and forth in the post-Stetson Bennett era. We all turned on the spring game, and it was like, oh, this is Carson Beck's football team. He was surgical. He had the best G-Day, and we're like, okay, they haven't named him the starter, but we're all assuming Carson Beck is going to be your guy. That would be the most ideal place, I think, for Alabama to find themselves in. And I don't think it's out of the question when you look at how this room is put together, and I think how this thing could ultimately shake out with Austin Mack having the leg up in digesting this offense from what I can gather given his time at Washington. So this can be very interesting to monitor the rest of the way. But if I had to pick a horse today to win the QB race at Alabama, I'd take Austin Mack. And I'm excited to see how that thing plays out because it'll obviously be massively impactful for the rest of the SEC. We talk about this a lot on the show, man, but Cato and I, whenever we get in the lab, we just talk about the new quarterback. A lot of new quarterbacks across the SEC, man. You got, obviously Alabama going to make a decision. Georgia's going to have to make a decision. Arch Manning at Texas. Don't look now. Those are the top 3 teams in the SEC when you look at betting odds in Vegas. So let the games begin. Let the spring games begin, I guess is a better way to say it. Now, nobody's questioning who Oklahoma's quarterback is going to be next year. It's going to be John Mateer, coming over with his new OC, Ben Arbuckle, from Washington State. We did this for Michigan and got some great feedback from y'all, but I want us to do this together right now. What can you expect from the new-look Oklahoma offense behind Mateer, Arbuckle, John Kuzieski, Washington State quarterback coach, also on staff now in Norman? We'll break it down right now. First things first, make sure you are subscribed right here to the On3 YouTube channel, College Football, nothing but college football all year round. If you just love ball, man, this is your spot. No additives, no high fructose corn syrup, no preservatives, just ball and only ball. So we appreciate y'all being locked in, being subscribed. I don't want us to do a super in-depth X's and O's, breakdown, nitty-gritty kind of stuff like that. I want us to have just a casual is the wrong word because casual sort of become a dirty word in college football, but I want us to have a high-level understanding of what we're going to get here from Ben Arbuckle's offense at Oklahoma. I think to get a good gauge for this, you look at who Ben Arbuckle is. Ben Arbuckle majors in quarterback play. Austin Reed at Western Kentucky, the guy who lit it up under him. Cam Ward at Washington State also lit it up and then went and lit it up at Miami. John Mateer lit it up last year under him at Washington State. I expect no difference here for Oklahoma going forward. Something that'll jump out right away when you watch Oklahoma in 2025 compared to the season before, there's going to be a lot of juice in the passing game. Now, it may not be the air raid of air raids when you talk about like what Mike Leach, rest in peace, has done and Shannon Dawson and all that, but it's going to be aggressive. Last year, Washington State averaged 9.6 yards a pass. Number 3 in America. Translation, push the ball downfield a little bit. That's a very stark contrast to what you weren't able to do last year at Oklahoma. I totally get some of that as personnel-driven, whether it be the receivers being dinged up as much as they were, or the offensive line, or the quarterback being consistent. I get all that, but like to compare, Oklahoma was right around half of what Washington State was through the air. 5.8 yards a pass, scoring only 21 points a game. So Oklahoma now with Ben Arbuckle being able to, or at least in theory, trying to push the ball downfield, what that does is that forces the defense to at least have to honor that. Like if I know that you're going to be trying to attack my safeties and I have to account for the vertical shots any given play, I can't be as aggressive when I try to play the run. I can't be as aggressive when I get those those shallow routes underneath. I have to honor that. So what that does is that creates space underneath for John Mateer to work, for the receivers to work in space. A Deion Burks in space might not be the worst thing in the world. There's a lot there that I think is opened up by being so aggressive. It's like when you throw haymakers a lot in a boxing match. This is not me speaking from experience. I've never been in a boxing match, but I've seen my fair share of Jake Paul fights. When you throw some haymakers at the chin, yeah, you might want to keep the hands up a little bit more, Bubba. So when my hands are up so much, guess what I can't do? I can't throw shots back at you. I have to be a little bit strategic. So all that's to say, I think that's going to benefit Oklahoma in a massive way. And quite frankly, it'll just be more fun to watch, to see the aggression downfield from Mateer, Arbuckle in this offense here in 2025. Now, I say that, and there might be a small part of the Oklahoma fan base that says, okay, more aggressive, spread concepts. Yes, I like where this is going, but there might be some PTSD from the Lincoln Riley era and saying, hey, we appreciate what that was. We appreciate the success we had on the field, but the tempo and the attitude of our team was very different than what we come to value here in Norman, Oklahoma. Because as much as I think Lincoln Riley is going to have success at USC long term, you brought Brent Venables in because he embodies what you want your Sooner football team to be, which is hard-nosed, gritty, blue-collar in a sense, hard work, all those things. Like that's what I think Oklahoma football at its core wants to be. So you're saying one thing, but then you're also saying we're going to push the ball downfield. Kind of feels like verbiage we heard around the Lincoln Riley era, no? Well, I see where you're coming from, but you look at what Ben Arbuckle was at Washington State, they still made a priority of running the football. 54% of the time, Washington State was toting the rock. And I think when you look at what Oklahoma has in this backfield, there's some cause for optimism around the need to get their running backs the football. So I don't think it's a thing where you just totally abandon the run game and try to, air it out to beat your opponents. That'll be a factor, but you still, I think, will be a pretty run-centric team in a lot of ways. Piggybacking off of that, you're going to be creative and more dangerous because now you have a John Mateer at quarterback for you, a dude who ran for a little bit under 1,000 yards last year at the quarterback position. So, yeah, what he does off script we'll talk about in a little bit, but the way that he can carry the mail for you in design quarterback runs or in the option game or whatever, that's something else defenses now have to worry about and will only make you more dynamic with whatever else you want to do with your running backs or throwing the football downfield because it gets the defense a little bit scrambled, right? The more I can make you worry about different ways I can attack you, you have to worry about quarterback run, the vertical passing game, and our running backs. Okay, that's a lot on your plate during the week for a game plan. Now, if you got Cato Nose back there running the alley, you might be in trouble. I mean, dude's all multiple-time all-conference safety. I'm just saying, though, I don't think Cato's suiting up for any of these teams that Oklahoma's playing this year. So that's good news for them. As a viewer, though, of Oklahoma football, I think the nice thing for Sooner fans is you can now watch a game and have a little bit of this yes and mentality. Like last year, I think there was a lot of hope in trying to out-scheme defenses or hoping that you had the right game plan dialed up to attack some weak spots. And I think Ben Arbuckle will do a great job of that. But what we just alluded to a second ago with John Mateer, even if that game plan isn't perfect, y'all, he is good enough as an athlete and as a improviser to make it happen and to get you into a positive play, even if the play may not be positive in the moment versus that specific scheme. He's a guy that, the X's and O's at a certain point won't matter. I'm not saying he can just take over any given time he wants and play all willy-nilly. I'm not saying that, but I am saying with what he does whenever the play breaks down, you can still have optimism that something good is going to happen, which wasn't the way that you felt a season ago. Like Michael Hawkins Jr., as good as an athlete as he is and as dynamic as he was at times for Oklahoma, when the play broke down, you're holding your breath a little bit, crossing your fingers, right? Just get us out of this sack, brother. Get us to 2nd and 4. And he did a good job of that at times, but it wasn't consistent enough to make you feel great whenever the play broke down. I think there's going to be a feeling of excitement whenever a play breaks down for Sooner fans here with John Mateer running the show. So the last thing I'll say here about Oklahoma and what the offense is going to look like in 2025, it's going to be really versatile. Like you look at the numbers and just what Washington State was last year with Arbuckle and Mateer, they were as good, it felt like, against teams that would drop 7 or 8 into coverage versus teams that would try to apply pressure to John Mateer. Like what that says to me is they're going to be really versatile. And when you're versatile, usually that means that it's your offensive coordinator having a good game plan and also giving answers to your quarterback within that game plan. And then within that, you're trusting your quarterback to find the right answer with the game plan that you've presented to him. So that's a really roundabout way to tell you that I think Arbuckle is going to empower John Mateer to run the show out there. Like any given play, I think John Mateer will have a variety of options he can go to, which isn't super uncommon for an offense in college football. But when you give a guy of John Mateer's caliber the options from Ben Arbuckle, that's going to, I believe, make it very difficult to defend because of what I just mentioned. You want to drop 7 or 8? We got to play for that. You want to bring pressure? We got to play for that. We have a check for that. We have answers for that. Something that you didn't really have as much a season ago. It felt like they were very much so dependent on having the right call for a specific look against different defenses. So it'll be very hyper-driven by the quarterback. It'll be very much so dependent on John Mateer. But guess what, man? That's why you brought in Norman. That's why he's going to be your quarterback. You didn't bring him here to be like an added addition to the pieces that you have already in play. You brought him here to be the temperature setter, to be the catalyst, to change the entire outlook of what Oklahoma was offensively last year. Oklahoma doesn't accept mediocrity on offense. They don't accept 21 points a game, especially not with who's been quarterbacks there previously. In the modern era alone, like Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl champion Jalen Hurts, excuse me. There's a lot there when it comes to the quarterback play from an expectations level. And if you've watched this show, you know that we think very highly of John Mateer, and by translation, we think very highly of what Oklahoma can do here in 2025. Love the offense. I love the attitude of the offense here, being aggressive with Arbuckle, giving John Mateer options, and also still wanting to run the gosh darn ball, man, which I think Oklahoma Sooner fans will appreciate. So weapons got to stay healthy, got to translate all those things, but the offense, I'm buying stock. I'm buying stock here as we move into 2025, and I can't wait to see it. Cato also buying a lot of stock. I want to make sure that that's on the record here because Cato, our producer for the show, who does a phenomenal job, first team all program kind of job, very high on John Mateer, and we'll chop it up some more about that, I'm sure, on Thursday's show. But just making sure there's a healthy amount of alignment on this side of the camera when it comes to our belief in A1 John Mateer. So we've been doing a segment here over the course of the last last couple of weeks, where we just put the call to action out on the socials and say, hey, hit me with your most unpopular college football take. And one of the most consistent responses we got was that the BCS era was superior to the college football playoff era. And this surprised me, honestly, and it wasn't something where it was, like, I've tweeted this out a few times asking for unpopular takes, and every single time, it's like darn near double-digit responses of people saying the BCS was better. And I just think we need to have a come-to-Jesus moment about this. Y'all, the BCS was not better than the playoff. It wasn't. In my opinion, I do not see a world where the BCS was a better postseason for us than the playoff. Now, I understand the pushback. JD, it had a maximum amount of value on the regular season. And you're the guy who's always shouting about how the regular season is what makes college football special, and that's why you were anti-12-team playoff, right? You're absolutely right. But what I would also say is what I appreciated about the 4-team playoff is it struck the happy medium of important regular season with we're going to actually let some games be played here in the postseason to decide who our champion is. And the BCS, to me, like the infatuation with that is a lot like your parents whenever they just rave about the music that they grew up with. And they tell you that, X, Y, and Z different artists is so much better than whoever you listen to nowadays. And that's fine. And they're not just saying that to say that. But I do think the reason why you say that is you become in love with nostalgia. And I've said on this show, I think nostalgia is a key pillar of what college football is and why we love it so much. But just because we're nostalgic about something doesn't mean it's the right way to go. Like, I'll use this for a different comparison musically. A lot of people talk about missing the old Drake and different Drake albums being better. And it's like, yeah, maybe so. And we make a lot of comps to Drake on this show, so roll with me here. But to say that you like a certain album of Drake's just because it was older and he sounded different doesn't mean it's actually better. What it means is I think it actually aligns far more with a period of your life that you identify with. And like for me, there's a Drake album that came out when I was a senior in high school. And like that album was awesome because it was a soundtrack to that really exciting and just carefree part of my life before we all left for college. Doesn't mean that it's on its own a better album. Same thing with the BCS. A lot of us grew up in the BCS era. And that's what we tie our earliest memories of when we talk about college football. It doesn't mean it was better. Just because it was a good time in your life doesn't mean it actually is the right model for us to follow here when it comes to deciding a national champion, which to me is what the postseason should be about. It should be about crowning a national champion. I don't want to hear about TV ratings. I don't necessarily want to have this big discussion about nostalgia as a whole. Like, to me, it's about what is giving us the best system to value the regular season while also having a healthy understanding that we got to play some football games to decide who the national champion is going to be. And when you look at just the way the BCS, quite frankly, swung and missed multiple times during that era, a lot of people don't acknowledge that. Like today, all you hear people scream about is, well, the games have got to be decided on the field. Get Boise State in there. Get this undefeated team. Get this team that won their conference. Like, I want a bunch of teams that just deserve a chance to be in there to have a chance to compete for a national championship. That wasn't the BCS. You had 11 teams left out of a national title game that were undefeated. If any team that was undefeated didn't make the college football playoff, regardless of conference, people would have rioted. People would have lost their mind. The thing for me when it comes to the BCS is not even so much about these undefeated, G5 teams or other teams not making the college football playoff or having a chance to play for a national title. To me, it's just the idea of a computer making a decision on what a football game should look like, especially when the margins are tight. Like 2003, you got multiple teams with one loss, but for some reason, this computer puts value on other teams as opposed to a USC and says, nope, you know what? These teams deserve to play for a national title. Like, how do you tell me there's 4 or 5 one-loss teams, but the computer decides the fate of 3 of those teams? So therefore, that's how their season should end. That doesn't, like, I appreciate computers, but I don't want a MacBook telling me who's playing for a national championship. No disrespect to Steve Jobs. Rest in peace. A computer also, I don't think, does a great job telling us about matchups. Like, is a computer really accounting for who and what a Jeremiah Smith is in a different matchup? Is a computer accounting for momentum and Ohio State having lost to Michigan and therefore being, quite frankly, pissed off and going on a run? I don't think it does. And so much of the human element to me is what makes college football special. And so when you decide on a national champion or a national championship matchup based on what a computer says and some numbers and some analytics they crunch, like, I appreciate numbers. Numbers are for nerds. All right, like let's leave numbers on the side. Analytics are cool, but numbers are not deciding, for us at least, what a national championship game should look like. One more comp I'll make here, one more story I want to tell. There's a book that I enjoy, bestseller actually of all time, called The Bible. And there's a story in that book about a group of Israelites getting out of Egypt. Bad conditions in Egypt. They get out. They're headed to the Promised Land. And it's interesting now. As soon as the Israelites get out of Egypt, start getting a little hungry. They're walking for a while. They're getting a little bit, we all get hangry. But they start saying, man, wasn't life better in Egypt? Wasn't it better when we had, 3 square meals a day and a roof over our heads? It's like, no, it wasn't. Egypt was not good. The BCS was not good. Oh, but now because we have to deal with, some different parameters around our selection Sunday and we have a committee, we're like, man, wasn't the BCS better? No, it wasn't, y'all. It wasn't. Anytime you step into your future, you start having some inconveniences, you start glorifying the past. Like, let's remember, the BCS was still not perfect. It was still, in today's day and age, we would have had multiple one-loss teams at home for other multiple one-loss teams playing for a national title. It's not perfect. So, with that being said, I appreciate the nostalgia of the BCS. It was a formative time in all of our lives as college football fans and enjoying what that was. And I think the Crystal Ball Trophy was sick, first of all, but like, it's not the right way to decide a national champion. And for me, at least, let's not let nostalgia run the show when it comes to deciding our model for picking a national champion. So, yeah, I guess it's funny because we ask for unpopular takes and then you give us unpopular takes and we, I guess, reply with a popular answer. But regardless, we'll keep doing that. So we appreciate y'all bringing the juice there. And when you bring an unpopular take to the table that we agree with, as we've done a couple times on this show, we'll obviously make sure we unpack that to the proper amount. So, again, some things changing on the channel, some things looking a little bit different. If you're dialed in via podcast, we appreciate you. If you haven't yet subscribed to that feed, go ahead and do that for us because it helps us get the show to more people and just grow our platform overall. But like I said, the heart behind this whole deal, the college football sickos, junkies. I had one person get in the comment section and say, college football degenerates that watch this show, thank you. That's not changing. So for Cato on the ones and twos, for myself, JD PicKell, we're going to keep this college football degenerate, sicko, junkie party rolling. And we will see y'all next time.